Welcome to Hong Kong Brief. The content of the briefing includes: Hong Kong court dismisses firearms charge against Republican senator. PetroChina posts record $6.3 billion quarterly income on higher output, fuel sales. China Evergrande winding up hearing adjourned as it seeks new debt deal. HSBC launches $3 billion share buyback, profit disappoints on rising costs. Morning bid, market bounce sets up Fed-dominated week ahead. Hong Kong court dismisses firearms charge against Republican senator. The Independent. A court in Hong Kong has cleared a U.S. senator of a gun charge after he was arrested for entering Chinese territory with a weapon. Republican leader Jeff Wilson had declared that he was in possession of a gun at the airport on October 21. The court ruled that the incident was an honest mistake and approved a bind-over order for Wilson. Under this order, he is required to keep the peace and avoid committing further firearms offenses for 2 years. If he fails to comply, he will be fined 2,000 Hong Kong dollars, $255. PetroChina posts record $6.3 billion quarterly income on higher output, fuel sales. Reuters. PetroChina, Asia's largest oil and gas producer, has reported a 21% rise in Q3 profit, with net profit rising to 46.38 billion Chinese yuan, $6.3 billion, as increased production and improved domestic fuel demand offset lower oil and gas prices. PetroChina's crude oil output rose 4.3% from a year earlier to 706 million barrels, including a 22% growth in overseas production to 122 million barrels. Natural gas output rose 6.1% to 3,656.6 billion cubic feet. China Evergrande winding up hearing adjourned as it seeks new debt deal. The Globe and Mail. A Hong Kong court has given China Evergrande a 5-week reprieve to come up with a revised debt restructuring plan or face liquidation. Evergrande, which has over $300 billion of liabilities, defaulted on its offshore debt in late 2021 and has become the face of China's debt crisis. The company had been working on a $23 billion offshore debt restructuring plan, but this was thrown off course when its billionaire founder was confirmed to be under investigation for suspected criminal activities. Evergrande's shares fell 9.8% after the court ruling. HSBC launches $3 billion share buyback, profit disappoints on rising costs. The Globe and Mail. HSBC has announced a $3 billion share buyback alongside a doubling of Q3 profit, which nevertheless fell short of expectations. Costs rose more than forecasted due to rising wages and greater technology spending. HSBC said that, excluding the acquisition of Silicon Valley Bank's British unit, costs would increase by up to 5% this year, more than its previous target of 3%. The bank posted pre-tax profit of $7.7 billion for Q3, compared to $3.2 billion a year earlier. Canadian scholar of Tiananmen massacre denied visa to continue working in Hong Kong. The Globe and Mail. Rowena He, a Canadian-Chinese scholar who specializes in the 1989 pro-democracy movement in China, has been barred from Hong Kong and terminated from her employment at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, CUHK. The move follows the city's crackdown on dissent, which has included the banning of the annual candlelit vigil in Victoria Park and the closure of a museum dedicated to the 1989 protests. Professor He's case has been described as further evidence of Chinese government censorship and revisionism in academia in Hong Kong. She has since secured a research position at the University of Texas at Austin. Morning update: desperate Gazans turn to raiding UN warehouses as supplies dwindle. The Globe and Mail. Israeli troops have entered the northern Gaza Strip, as airstrikes have begun to hit closer to hospitals. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has called the airstrikes on their warehouses a worrying sign that civil order is starting to break down after 3 weeks of war and a tight siege on Gaza. The situation in Gaza remains desperate, with thousands of people breaking into warehouses to obtain supplies such as flour and basic hygiene products. Yesterday, nearly 3 dozen trucks entered Gaza in the largest aid convoy since the war began. Communications have also been restored to most of Gaza's 2.3 million people after an intense Israeli bombardment knocked out phone and internet services late on Friday. Meanwhile, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has proposed that international troops, possibly led by NATO, take temporary control of the Gaza Strip once the Israeli invasion has achieved its aims. China's top car brand BYD confirms record quarterly profit. Bloomberg. BYD, China's top-selling car brand, has reported a record quarterly profit of 10.4 billion Chinese yuan, $1.4 billion, for Q3 2021, an 82% increase from the same period last year. The profit growth comes despite a slowdown in the sector. The company's net income for the first 9 months of the year reached 21.4 billion Chinese yuan, surpassing its full-year figure for 2020. BYD sold almost as many electric vehicles as Tesla in Q3, falling just 3,456 short. BYD's shares have risen 40% in Hong Kong over the past year and 28% year-to-date. Jolie urges Israel to ease Gaza bombing campaign, citing human tragedy. The Globe and Mail. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly has called on Israel to halt its heavy bombardment of Gaza in order to allow for humanitarian aid to reach Palestinians. Speaking at the Economic Club in Toronto, Joly described the situation in Gaza as a human tragedy and called for a humanitarian truce in the region. Urging Israel to respect international law and use of force, she also condemned extremist settlers' attacks in the West Bank. Joly said that 400 Canadians were trapped in Gaza, and that the government had a duty to bring them to safety. She has been liaising with Israel, Egypt, Qatar, and the US over the past 3 weeks to negotiate the safe departure of these individuals, but admitted that time was running out. Joly also discussed Canada's deteriorating relations with India and pledged that the government would no longer tolerate foreign interference. She called for the creation of a foreign agent registry to help prevent meddling by China and other countries in Canadian affairs. India's Vistara plans new routes after inaugural Hong Kong flight. Bloomberg. Indian airline Vistara plans to launch several new routes in the first quarter of next year as it prepares to merge with Air India. The full-service carrier, which is co-owned by Tata Group and Singapore Airlines, has already announced plans to start flights to Bali from Delhi and to Frankfurt from Mumbai. It is also considering starting a route to Paris. Vistara currently operates 63 aircraft, flying to 32 domestic and 16 overseas destinations. Pre-market, European stocks gain, investors focus on central bank meetings. The Globe and Mail. European stock indexes opened slightly higher on Monday as investors focused on the outlook for interest rates ahead of a busy week of central bank meetings and economic data. Investors are waiting for the outcome of meetings at the Bank of Japan, BOJ, on Tuesday, the U.S. Federal Reserve on Wednesday and the Bank of England, BOE, on Thursday, as well as Chinese manufacturing data on Tuesday and key U.S. jobs data on Friday, all of which will be scrutinized for any clues that central banks have raised interest rates sufficiently to combat inflation and can look toward easing monetary policy again. China holds major financial conference as leaders maneuver to get slowing economy back on track. Associated Press. China's National Financial Work Conference, which began on Monday, is expected to focus on mending the country's fractured property market, creating jobs for unemployed youth, and spurring faster economic growth. The government plans to issue $330 billion in bonds for infrastructure projects and disaster prevention in an effort to counter the slowdown in housing construction. However, economists warn that the challenge lies in finding ways to ensure sustainable, balanced growth while unwinding the massive debt held by real estate developers, local governments, and regional banks. The conference will address longer-term reforms, with immediate problems such as the real estate sector being a priority. Bank of China profit rises 3.3% with margins narrowing. Bloomberg. Bank of China has reported a 3.3% increase in Q3 profits, despite a narrowing of net interest margins. The bank's net interest margin fell to 1.64% from 1.77% a year earlier. Bank of China's results follow mixed earnings from China's largest state-owned banks last week, with ICBC's 3-month profit little changed from the previous year and Bank of Communications dropping 3%. China Construction Bank and Agricultural Bank of China managed to offset a margin slide with lower credit impairments. Blackstone enters Indian healthcare services with care hospitals by Reuters. Private equity firm Blackstone has agreed to acquire a majority stake in India's care hospitals from asset management firm TPG. Blackstone will invest $1 billion in the hospital chain and hold over 75% of the company. The deal comes as the demand for private healthcare in India is rising post-pandemic, attracting global investors to the sector. In a separate deal, Care Hospitals will acquire a majority stake in Kim's Health to form one of India's largest hospital platforms. The combined value of the two deals is estimated to be between $1.3 billion and $1.5 billion. For former Hong Kong student leaders jailed over their praise of a knife attack on a police officer. Associated Press. For former student leaders from the University of Hong Kong have been sentenced to 2 years in prison for inciting people to wound others through their praise of a man who stabbed a police officer before killing himself in 2021. The students were held responsible for passing a motion in the Students' Union Council expressing deep sadness and appreciating the sacrifice of the man who took his own life. The motion was seen as inciting hatred against the police. The students initially faced charges of advocating terrorism under the national security law, but they pleaded guilty to an alternative charge of incitement to wound with intent. Good day, viewers of 6 Degrees Briefing. I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world, here to bring you the latest news and happenings from around the globe. Today, we have a diverse range of stories, from legal matters in Hong Kong to financial developments in China and international affairs. So, let's dive right in, shall we? In Hong Kong, a court has dismissed a firearms charge against U.S. Senator Jeff Wilson, ruling it as an honest mistake. Wilson had declared possession of a gun upon entering Chinese territory, but the court deemed it a misunderstanding. It seems even politicians can make honest blunders, don't you think? Moving on to the financial world, PetroChina has posted a record quarterly income of $6.3 billion, thanks to increased production and improved domestic fuel demand. Despite lower oil and gas prices, the company managed to achieve a 21% rise in profit. Looks like PetroChina hit the fuel jackpot. Meanwhile, China Evergrande, the face of China's debt crisis, has been given a 5-week extension to come up with a revised debt restructuring plan or face liquidation. The company's shares fell after the court ruling, adding to the drama. It seems Evergrande is still searching for a way out of its financial troubles. In other news, HSBC has announced a $3 billion share buyback, but its profit for Q3 fell short of expectations due to rising costs. The bank is facing challenges from increased wages and technology spending, leading to higher costs than forecasted. Looks like HSBC spent a little too much on its shopping spree. Now, let's talk about the Federal Reserve, which is expected to keep rates unchanged for the second straight meeting. Small-cap indexes have seen losses this year, while larger ones are enjoying gains. With earnings season showing mixed results, it will be interesting to see how the Fed's decisions impact the market. Will they be the heroes the small firms need? In academia, a Canadian scholar specializing in the 1989 pro-democracy movement in China has been denied a visa to continue working in Hong Kong. This case highlights concerns over Chinese government censorship and revisionism in academia. It seems academic freedom is under threat, even in Hong Kong. Turning our attention to the Middle East, the situation in Gaza remains desperate, with people raiding UN warehouses for supplies as the Israeli bombardment continues. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has expressed concern over the breakdown of civil order. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has proposed international troops taking temporary control of Gaza once Israeli aims are achieved. Will this proposal bring some much-needed stability to the region? On the automotive front, China's top car brand BYD has reported a record quarterly profit, despite a slowdown in the sector. The company's net income for the first 9 months of the year has already surpassed its full-year figure for 2020. Looks like BYD is driving full speed ahead. In international relations, Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly has called on Israel to halt its heavy bombardment of Gaza to allow for humanitarian aid. Joly described the situation as a human tragedy and urged Israel to respect international law. She also discussed Canada's deteriorating relations with India and called for measures to prevent foreign interference. Looks like Canada is taking a stand. Indian airline Vistara is planning to launch new routes in the first quarter of next year as it prepares to merge with Air India. The carrier, co-owned by Tata Group and Singapore Airlines, is eyeing routes to Bali, Frankfurt, and possibly Paris. Looks like Vistara is set to soar to new heights. In the world of finance, European stock indexes opened slightly higher as investors await central bank meetings and economic data. The Bank of Japan, the U.S. Federal Reserve, and the Bank of England will all be closely watched for any clues on interest rates and monetary policy. Will central banks be the stars of the show this week? China's National Financial Work Conference has begun, focusing on mending the country's fractured property market and spurring economic growth. The government plans to issue bonds for infrastructure projects, but challenges lie in ensuring sustainable growth while unwinding massive debt. It seems China is trying to find the right balance to keep its economy on track. Bank of China has reported a 3.3% increase in Q3 profits, despite a narrowing of net interest margins. The bank's results follow mixed earnings from other state-owned banks in China. It seems Bank of China managed to weather the storm, but it's a mixed bag for the others. In a deal worth $1 billion, private equity firm Blackstone has acquired a majority stake in India's care hospitals. The demand for private healthcare in India is rising post-pandemic, attracting global investors to the sector. It seems Blackstone is making a healthy investment. Lastly, four former student leaders from the University of Hong Kong have been sentenced to 2 years in prison for inciting violence through their praise of a man who stabbed a police officer. The students faced charges under the national security law but pleaded guilty to an alternative charge. It seems expressing support can sometimes lead to unintended consequences. And there you have it, a roundup of today's news stories. From legal matters to financial developments and international affairs, it's been quite a ride. Now, I invite you, my witty and insightful viewers, to share your thoughts. What do you make of these news stories? Do you have any burning questions or hilarious comments? I'm all ears. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.